Hello everybody and welcome to my channel. Today we are going to talk about how to get started, and I want to stress that part of it. How to get started improvising over chord progressions. We're going to use as our first step in that direction practicing arpeggios. My approach to My approach to improvising over chord progressions is different. We don't tackle the chord progressions until we've mastered the chords. Doesn't that make sense? You know, when we're trying to tackle a complex problem, and what is a complex problem, right? A complex problem is a problem that's made up of multiple parts. That's the definition of a complex problem. When we try to tackle a complex problem, the proper way to do that is one problem at a time. And when you think about problem solving that way, it makes absolutely no sense. It's like trying to conquer Mount Everest all in one go, right? Instead of trying, there's different steps that have to happen before you do Mount Everest, okay? There's all kinds of things, learning about the gear, getting yourself in shape, all this stuff. There's things that have to happen before you conquer Mount Everest. And it's the same way with jazz improvisation. If you want to learn how to improvise over chords and you don't know the chords, how is that gonna work? Okay? So, and I have to be careful about this. When I say know the chords, I don't mean you know what the notes are. We're not talking about a perfunctory knowledge. We're not talking about an introductory knowledge. If I say C major or C7, that's not good enough. I know maybe you can already do that. That's not good enough. That doesn't, it's the same thing with the scales. It's exactly the same thing with the scales. It's interesting because I have a book coming out about scales, right? And I have at the end of the book a warning that the band scales are not good enough for you as a musician. They are just an introduction to scales. I'm not against band scales. I just wrote a book, right? And that book will be out, I think, in about 3 weeks, 4 weeks. But anyway, the idea is instead of just being able to play the scale like, right? That really doesn't give you much in terms of knowing that key. If that's the extent of your scale work in that key, let's do a different key because everyone knows C, right? Let's do F sharp. Right? That's just an introduction to F sharp. That's just the skeleton. And it's the same way with the chords. If you know that is the chord, well, congratulations. You've got an introduction. What we want to do is take it way past that. Okay? If you can't do patterns over the chords, and what do we call patterns over chords? We call those arpeggios, right? So let's do the C7. Here's one of the patterns I would do. I would normally do that twice because I can do it twice in one breath, right? And then I would do the 4 variations. If you know anything about my technical stuff, I do 4 variations of each pattern. And for 7th chord arpeggios, I normally do 3 different patterns. That's 12 exercises total. And I know that a lot of people will say, well, the way that you build your technique in the chords is to play them in half steps or in different intervals, right? If you do it like that, you're getting the finger technique, and that's not bad, but you're not training your mind in a way that you're going to be able to read the changes and like completely know what it is you're looking at. If you practice, if you take it, if the direction you're going when you take it to the next step, besides just the introduction, is to play it up in half steps, up in whole steps, up in minor thirds and stuff like that, you're not going in a direction that's going to help you so much in your improvisation. Now, what I've been doing right now is a dominant 7th chord, but I really believe that your first step should be the triads, okay? Don't start with the 7th chords. You need to start with the triads. Do your triad arpeggios first. So like the pattern that I just played for you. It's the same pattern, we're just leaving out the B flat. Now, if you can do all 12 of these patterns that I'm talking about, then, okay, so that's the first step. Do all 12 of the patterns, and by the way, I have for the player level, that's the 3rd level in my system. For the player level, that goes up to G above the staff. I have what I call modules, right? For the major arpeggios, the minor arpeggios, and the diminished arpeggios. Okay, those are the 3 main ones you want to start off with. And I'll put links to those down in the description. It has all 12 of the patterns that I'm talking about. Now what you want to do is learn all 12 of those patterns while you're reading them. That's the first step. Learn those 12 patterns reading them. Then when you've mastered them, start doing them by memory. But when you're doing it by memory, you want to be looking at the chord symbol for that arpeggio that you're doing. That's how you're going to train your mind so that you can read the chords. Okay? Now, let me go back again. I want to make this very clear. In fact, I'll put a graphic up here. All right? I'll put the list here. First step is to read these arpeggios from the modules that I have links to below. The second step is to, once you've played through them enough that you have them memorized, start playing them by memory. And instead of looking at the music, I want you to look at, and I'll put a graphic right here. And you can take an index card and write it. I'm thinking about later selling a graphic package that you can download and print it so that you have a whole page of the symbols that you need. And you look at the symbol while you play the arpeggios from memory. And that will help associate the look of the chord progression with your fingerings, with your ear. It's like a holistic way of learning the chords. So those are the first two steps. And after that, you want to improvise over the single chord. Only improvise using the notes from that chord. And I know, that sounds kind of bizarre. Oh, by the way, when you're improvising, you're looking at that chord symbol. The first step on the improvisation part is to only play those notes, right? So let's say I have C major, and I have an index card with a big C on it. And you know what? I did play one extra D. You heard it just now. I probably need to make a video later about what happens when you're doing an improv exercise and quote unquote wrong notes come out, but I'm not going to get into that right now. The next step is to add passing tones, but you're still primarily improvising over that chord. All right. When you get through all of these different arpeggio steps, then and only then, if you're my student, will we start looking at chord progressions. Now, here's the interesting part of this. I don't believe that we should play chord progressions by playing the chord progressions. I know that sounds weird, but I don't believe that's how that works. I believe the way we play harmony is through the language. The language implies harmonic context, so the language that we use. Now, we'll have to do a video on that too later. And I think it gets a little complicated philosophically, because here I am telling you to work on your scales. I'm telling you to play your arpeggios. I'm even telling you to improvise where the arpeggio is the main content. But I'm going to make this very clear, these are exercises. And you know what? There's something I've been thinking a lot about lately. These are technical exercises that I'm talking about right now. Like those modules down in the links, those modules are technical, right? They're supposed to develop your technique. But you know what? When we're developing technique, it's not really about developing your technique. It's about developing your ear. That's something I've only recently understood. There's no such thing as technical exercises. There are only ear training exercises. If you can, ever hear people say, if you can hear it, you can play it, right? That's where we want to get, right? That's what the technical studies are all about. When you play the scales, you're playing them, the whole goal is to play them by ear. When you're playing the arpeggios, the entire goal, the objective, is to play them by ear. And so when we're doing these studies, now going back to the arpeggios, when we're doing these studies, yes, we want to get the fingers to move right. We want to get the embouchure to move and adjust to the intervals and all that, because there are a lot of intervals in these studies. The the third group of variations ends up being very angular. But what guides us through that is our ear. We're training our ear, not our fingers. And why am I saying that? It's because the fingers, that's almost automatic, right? You do a little work on this, a little bit of work on that, and it's like, bam, it's there. This, not so much. Learning how to hear, to to play in a way that what you hear is fastened to the physical aspects of what you're doing. That there's no division between those things. Those two things go so hand in hand. What you hear and how you feel when you're playing, they become so hand in hand that they are one and the same. They merge so much that you can't separate one from the other. You cannot separate the technique from the ear training. They are not two separate things. They are one thing. The reason why we play all those scales and all those arpeggios and all those chromatic patterns and all that stuff, all the stuff that falls under the category of technique, is to train your ear. Now, going back to the subject, the arpeggios. If you can't even hear one arpeggio, one chord symbol by itself, I ask you, how are you going to play now a whole sequence of chords and like something like rhythm changes where each chord gets 2 beats? How are you going to do that? It's not going to happen. And if you try, you're going to have a disaster. So the first step, the baby step of learning to read and improvise over chord progressions is to learn the chords through arpeggios. Now, in the meantime, because that's going to take you years to master it. Not years to get started. Okay, what I gave you already here is enough to get you started, and you can start making beautiful music now. Okay? But I'm talking about mastery. That's something that takes years to master. Okay? In the meantime, we're working on the language too. All right? I want to make that very clear. Don't just put all your improv eggs in that one chord basket, right? Don't only be doing chords. In fact, I tell my students to only do, and I do this too, only do one set of arpeggios a day. Now, when you first start doing this, you might be excited and want to do a whole book in one day. I said book, I call them modules. And maybe that's okay as an introduction. But after you get started, really you can do just one a day. You don't have to do more than that. And during at the same time, you're going to be over here learning the language, and then over here learning the tunes. Okay? We've talked about before on this channel about doing the 5 different areas of study, right? I'll link to that here. We do 5 different areas of study. We do listening, we do technique, we do the language, we learn tunes, and we practice improvising. Okay? And there is overlap in each of those areas, of course. So it's not as daunting as it may seem, right? But the arpeggios falls in the category of technique. And technique should not consume your whole practice time, okay? So yes, invest your time into the arpeggios. I'm going to remind you one more time, I have links below to my PayHip account where you can download these arpeggios, okay? Because really, if you want to learn how to improvise over the chord progressions, that's the first step, okay? And I'll try to get more of these arpeggio modules out there. If enough people buy them, I'll be more motivated, right? Okay, and to put those out. All right. If you have any questions about this, I know this is a little bit different from what most people teach. Most people teach you to do what they call the practice patterns, where you do the roots of each one. I don't do that. The roots, and then the roots and the thirds, and then the triads. I don't do that because I believe if you don't know the chords first, that's a waste of time. And then if you do know the chords already, it's still a waste of time because you can spend your time better doing something else to learn those progressions. But that's not what we're talking about now. All we're talking about now is how do you get started. And the way you get started in jazz improv, in my opinion, reading the changes, is by doing the arpeggios. Okay? All right. Any questions, please ask. Other than that, I will see you on the next video. God bless you.